Hello there, I'm Callum Johns and welcome to Fun Facts! Midichlorians. The word causes a variety of emotions in people, from outrage, laughter, or just a deflated sigh. But what are they really? Are they a dumbing down of the Force by George Lucas, or a fine addition to the world building? Let's delve into it, shall we? Midichlorians are first mentioned in The Phantom Menace, written straight by George Lucas, and it's an idea that came from George Lucas himself. So this is what he says.
Master, sir, I heard Yoda talking about midichlorians. I've been wondering, what are midichlorians?
Midichlorians are a microscopic life form that resides within all living cells.
They live inside me.
Inside your cells, yes. And we are symbionts with them.
Symbionts?
Life forms living together for mutual advantage. Without the midichlorians, life could not exist, and we would have no knowledge of the Force. They continually speak to us, telling us the will of the Force. When you learn to quiet your mind, you'll hear them speaking to you.
I don't understand.
With time and training, Annie, you will. You will.
So I'm going to mention sort of each part of the description. So midichlorians are organisms that are in every living cell. Nothing wrong with that. That's pretty much just saying that they're everywhere in the Star Wars universe. And Qui-Gon mentions that we are symbionts with them. Now, the definition of a symbiote, one of them, is an organism living in symbiosis with another. And there are multiple types of symbiosis. However, what Qui-Gon describes is mutualism, which is, as Qui-Gon says, life forms living together for mutual advantage. It allows the Jedi to use the Force with them as a conduit for it, while they are able to survive by existing inside of the bodies of people. And this actually lines up with what we know of science with endocytosis and the mitochondria and the chloroplasts in our cells as well. And this is how I imagine the evolution of cells went, as well as mitochondria and chloroplasts. They also have midichlorians as an extra one. So basically, they were extra bacterial cells, extra bacteria, that the cells needed. So over time, they have their own individual cell walls and everything. So over time, they came together and became one cell. So, for example, real-world version, mitochondria and chloroplasts have their own cell walls inside of regular cells. And chloroplasts are only for plants, of course. That's what gives them the green colour. And as we all know from high school, the mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell. So, for the example of mitochondria, the cell needed energy. How did it get energy? The mitochondria produces ATP. So they're going to absorb this mitochondria into a structure that is then saved and replicated. That's how I understand and what my theory is of actually how the midichlorians became part of the cells of the people in this Star Wars universe. Evolution at its finest. I will say though that without the midichlorians, life could not exist. Is a bit of an odd one, because we have the Yuzan Vong, the sort of stripped of the Force and being able to speak to it. There could be an explanation for that in that, I mean, they were still born with the Force and then it was stripped away and they were exiled from it. So they're still created with the Force. They're just cut off from it. And it also could very well be the understanding of the Jedi at the time, because you've got to remember this is an in-universe quote from the prequel era. So, as the Jedi learn or forget some knowledge, then they're just saying what they know at the time. We would have no knowledge of the Force is definitely correct, as per this explanation, as it's how the Jedi know how to use the Force, and all of that good stuff. They speak to us, telling us the will of the Force. Now I equate this to, say, people saying in religion that God has spoken to them. It's not literally what I'm doing here, talking to you. It's more of a feeling that is very hard to describe, and the best way to describe it is speaking to me. And this lines up with the learn to quiet your mind also, that Qui-Gon says, as quieting your mind, as per people who believe in God, enables you to listen to God easier and know how to listen to his voice. This, to me, is George Lucas drawing more parallels with Jedi and religion. So, from my reading of the EU as well, it fleshed out the story a lot, and it would follow George Lucas's vision for Star Wars, so expanded upon his idea for Midichlorians. I do not perceive what some people misconceive the Midichlorians to be as, oh, they're the Force, they're what equates to someone's power in the Force. That's all the Force is. No. A high midichlorian count is simply a byproduct of being Force sensitive. They live in all living things. So a midichlorian count that is high indicates Force sensitivity. Thus we have the Jedi, Sith, and the in-between. The Force users and the in-between, varying levels, and then ones that aren't Force sensitive at all. There is definitely a genetic advantage to some species from a midichlorian perspective, because some, like Midichlorians or even the old Sith species that is extinct by the time of the prequels, are born with Force sensitivity, and there aren't any, or at least many, there might be some odd exceptions of their species that aren't Force sensitive. However, there are some that have a weaker Force sensitivity, which is more evident in the Sith species than the Midichlorians. As for the Midichlorians, it was a genetic advantage to be able to use the Force, and they needed to be able to use the Force to see, as they don't have eyes. It's very interesting. Now, the midichlorian count is also something that shows again where the prequel Jedi are losing sight of who they should be and demysticizing the Force, dumbing it down to just numbers to indicate potential, limiting their thinking, rather than thinking about that raw potential that can be trained and used properly to be most effective. For example, someone with less Force sensitivity may be more creative, may have better training of it, would be able to defeat someone with a higher raw Force sensitivity without being trained. Plus a myriad of other aspects of the Force within the cosmic or unifying Force and the living Force. I feel like this adds to the overall need for the Jedi to almost die and then be remade into what Luke made them into in his new Jedi Order. So, as far as that goes, yes, it's expanded upon in the Revenge of the Sith novel and a few other EU novels that the Jedi needed to die in order for Luke to rebuild the Jedi Order into what it needs to be better than it was. So they don't have the flaws that the prequel Jedi had. And I really like that. And as a summary though, midichlorians are simply conduits for the Force. A high midichlorian count doesn't mean that you have more Force in you. It's just a byproduct of genetic disposition, possibly. But what I think of it as is pretty much just you're Force sensitive, you've got a bit higher midichlorian count. It's just a scientific thing to add to the science fiction section of space opera, science fantasy, whichever you like to call it, of Star Wars. And I don't see it as something bad, even though, you can question the execution of the prequels and George's ideas, but the idea itself is quite good. And another example of how the prequel Jedi were failing and losing sight of the path that they should have been on. So that's that about midichlorians. What do you think of midichlorians, and have you gained a new understanding from this perception? Let me know. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you in the next video. Be blessed. Bye.